May 7th of 1942, in the middle of the Coral Sea. At this moment, two of the largest carrier fleets in the world are stalking, desperately trying to find one another. Dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and escorting fighters are out in maximum effort strikes, hoping that they can find their targets in the thick tropical weather that is set in over the region. Up until this point in history, opposing carrier forces have never before attacked one another. Both sides know that the first one to hit the enemy will win the battle. What was about to unfold would become one of the most crucial and confusing battles of World War II, setting the stage for the rest of the Pacific War. This deadly clash would be set with challenges, setbacks, and luck, both good and bad. Told for the first time through first-hand accounts of men from both sides, this is the Battle of the Coral Sea. It is the spring of 1942, and fresh off the crippling blow at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese have continued their conquest of the Pacific. Major portions of Indonesia, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands have fallen to the forces of Imperial Japan. But their thirst for expansion had not yet been satisfied. In order to defend their newly captured territories, Japanese leaders realized that they had to isolate Australia and secure the southern flank of their Pacific stronghold. Thus, a plan was assembled. It would come from the desk of Vice Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue, with the support and oversight of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. This plan, titled Operation Mo, would see the Japanese attempt to take two key locations. The first was Tulagi, a small island in the Solomons that was to serve as a forward seaplane base, allowing their reconnaissance to sight enemy threats or targets in the region, covering nearly all of the Coral Sea and the Solomons. The second step and primary objective of Operation Mo was to take Port Moresby, a key city in New Guinea that would allow Japanese air power to strike the northern coast of Australia, preventing it from being used as a staging base for Allied operations against Japanese-held islands. Both of these together would create a buffer zone that would protect major Japanese bases like Rabaul, allowing a comfortable defensive perimeter around their island acquisitions. But after small forces of American aircraft had proved to be a serious nuisance in another invasion in New Guinea in March, Vice Admiral Inoue took heed. He specifically requested carrier cover for the operation, as he was worried that American land-based aircraft may be able to disrupt the landings if the invasion force sailed alone. Admiral Yamamoto reluctantly agreed. He very much wanted to keep his carrier force together, as he was currently planning the pivotal battle at Midway. But he gave in, expecting Operation Mo, a mission of far less importance, to be a quick success. After this quick side mission, his few carriers could quickly return to his main fleet. Many expected that it would be a good combat exercise for the upcoming real clash at Midway a few weeks later. But this was far different than the actual events that would transpire, and the results of this decision could not have been more significant. In early April, despite his reservations, Admiral Yamamoto sent a single light carrier, the Shoho, as well as the new Carrier Division 5, which included fleet carriers Zuikaku and Shokaku, to briefly support the operation. On board of the Zuikaku was an up-and-coming Japanese ace by the name of Tetsuzo Iwamoto, one of the top young pilots in the Imperial Navy, with 14 kills claimed over China and a handful of British aircraft earlier that month. He was quickly proving to be a skilled Zero pilot. In April, he wrote in his combat diary,
We had silently endured the scorching heat and bitter cold because we are eagerly anticipating returning home. Then we received the new orders to conduct surveillance missions in the South Pacific. This meant our long-awaited return home would be delayed again. It is said that Army units are about to attack the key stronghold of Port Moresby in New Guinea. To assist in this operation, naval forces are operating in the Coral Sea. Once Port Moresby falls into our hands, the landing operation against Australia could then proceed. But this is nothing more than wishful thinking. If the enemy dispatches mobile forces to attack, the consequences would be unthinkable. Nevertheless, under the protection of one converted carrier and other vessels, the Port Moresby invasion force boarded dozens of transport ships, entered the predetermined route, and launched the offensive.
Thousands of miles away, the Americans had a plan of their own. Unbeknown to the Imperial Navy, Allied codebreakers had just recently made major headway in their deciphering of Japanese communications. By April, they were reading a significant portion of Imperial Navy messages. Because of this, the U.S. Navy was already aware of the impending invasion at Port Moresby and had vectored 2 carriers to the Coral Sea, with hopes of intercepting this endeavor.
These 2 carriers were the USS Lexington and the USS Yorktown, both meeting to form Task Force 17, now under the command of Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. The Hornet and the Enterprise were also directed to the area, but due to distance, they would not make it in time for contact with the enemy. By May 2nd, the new Task Force 17 was entering the area, positive that the enemy was there, but unsure of what specifically they would find. That afternoon, the USS Yorktown launched patrols, flown by the SBD Dauntlesses of Scouting Squadron 5. One of these was piloted by a young man named Stanley Vedesa, commonly called Swede by his squadron mates. He would go on to become one of the most famous stories of the Battle of the Coral Sea. But here, he would also open it with a very routine mission. While on this scouting mission over the southern Pacific near the Coral Sea, he recalled sighting what appeared to be a vessel's wake in the waves below. In his biography, he later remembered,
"In a few seconds, the conning tower of a submarine, underway with decks awash, became plainly visible. At this time, I believe we were sighted, as the submarine made a crash dive, leaving a spot of turbulent water. We flew by this spot 3 times on the upsun side, and on the first pass, I saw the submarine at some depth and just ahead of the boil."
Swede would return to the Yorktown, and TBD Devastators would come and attempt to bomb the sub I-21 of Imperial Japan. This brief attack would open the Battle of the Coral Sea. However, the sub would survive.
Unfortunately though, when the Japanese sub reported the encounter to fleet commanders, the type of aircraft was not specified. At this point, Admiral Inoue had no knowledge that American carriers were nearby. And after the Doolittle raid a few weeks prior, it was believed that most of the American fleet was too far away to reach the area of Port Moresby, and that they would be operating mostly unopposed. But this was not the case. Had the Imperial Navy been tipped off that American carriers were now within range of this sub-attack, the battle could have shifted drastically. Instead, the Japanese fleet prepared for their invasion, and the American task force continued undetected.
According to the plans of Operation Mo, Tulagi would be taken first on May 3rd. The invasion was to be mostly uncontested, and within hours, hordes of ships brought supplies and seaplanes onto the small island. 20 miles to the south, on the nearby island of Guadalcanal, was a British coast watcher, a bold officer by the name of Major Martin Clemens. Stationed on the remote Pacific island, his job was to record and communicate key Japanese movements in the region. He, along with his Solomon native scouts, had been at it for months. Every day, they watched the horizon, reporting ship and aircraft sightings to help keep tabs on enemy movement and activity in the region. Now, on the evening of May 3rd, the distant ships and aircraft were not so distant anymore. For the first time in the war, the Imperial Navy had arrived at Tulagi, just a short trip across the coastal water from their base on Guadalcanal. He and his Solomon scouts watched as the few friendly ships on the island, mainly Royal Australian Air Force aircraft and small Allied patrol vessels, were now evacuating, leaving him and the Solomon natives by themselves, not knowing what lied ahead. This feeling did not sit well.
I stood with them on the beach. Everything seemed pretty final. The feeling of being left alone is never pleasant, and with the departure of the RAAF, even Andrew, my scout, was visibly shaken. The general opinion of the Solomon Islanders on the station was that if this was war, they didn't like it. The Japs had arrived. They could cruise over to our island in a matter of hours, and there had not been a sign that we had anything to stop them. That night, the 3rd of May, was one of the most miserable in my life. None of us dared to go to sleep, in case some hostile visitor appeared out of the dark to catch us unawares. We had a constant series of alarms, which kept everyone on the alert, and I was up and down to the beach, reassuring people all night long.
His fears would turn out to be correct. There would be a surprise attack the following morning, but not by Japan. On board of the USS Yorktown, the Coast Watcher's report, coupled with other intel, had reached Admiral Fletcher, notifying him that the Tulagi invasion was underway. So during the night, while Admiral Clemens and the Solomon natives lay awake, the American carriers steamed on towards Tulagi.
By dawn, she was within 110 nautical miles. Operating independently while the USS Lexington was being refueled, a strike was ordered first thing in the morning. At approximately 700 hours, the USS Yorktown sent off the first planned attack of the Battle of the Coral Sea. Wildcats, Devastators, and Dauntless dive bombers took off and headed north to hit the invasion force at Tulagi. However, the tropical weather at this time was becoming a serious factor. As the force set out, thick clouds and sporadic rain squalls kept visibility low, but the pilots pushed forward. One of them, again, was Swede Vedasa.
We went in high, 20,000 feet. Damn weather, it was bad right down to the bottom. You could see there were some breaks, too, and you could see some of the ships in the harbor. Skipper led us over in good shape. Down we went.
As the Yorktown's fighters and bombers arrived over Tulagi, the sound of gunfire and explosions broke through the peace of a quiet morning. This awoke Major Martin Clemens and his men on the nearby coast of Guadalcanal.
The vast white cumulus clouds over Guadalcanal suddenly came alive with the roar of planes, and the familiar heavy rumble of bombs began to be heard from Tulagi. Andrew, himself hardly awake, he shook me and he said, "Sir, all together Japan catch 'em trouble." We rubbed our sleep-starved eyes and packed up. We didn't have very good binoculars, but it was obvious that Jap shipping in Tulagi was in serious trouble. I could hardly believe it. Was it really true? As it slowly dawned upon us that it really was, a tattoo of sheer joy went out on the station drum. "Come and see," it said. "Come and see." About 0800, the noise of airplanes from the north increased, and we rushed out to witness the magnificent spectacle of 12 dive bombers plunging out from the clouds over Tulagi. There was a steely glint at the bottom of their dive. We guessed it was from the bombs they were launching. What a sight for sore eyes. It was the largest number of Allied planes we had ever seen.
Although it was a joyous occasion for the beleaguered coast watchers, the reality for Stanley Vedesa was that things were not going quite so well in that moment. The weather and humidity was causing him and the other SBD pilots a serious problem as they tipped their bombers downward.
I was one of the rear ones. Somewhere on the way down, sights and windshields again fogged over. Couldn't see a damn thing. We were blind. What the hell to do? If you're far enough down, you could try to make a drop, or you could try to recover for another attempt. I was high enough, so I recovered and dropped my bomb. As I'm pulling away, I dipped down and could see several transports getting underway.
Swede and his backseat gunner looked back as they turned for the Yorktown and saw damage to multiple ships and seaplanes. But after a quick flight home, they realized their day was not yet over. The aircraft from Air Group 5, after arriving back on deck, were told that they were being sent out again. Reports stated that there was no enemy air cover and that the carriers must be elsewhere. These reports were correct. The light carrier Shoho had been covering the landings at Tulagi, but after a quiet May 3rd, she had pulled back to prepare for the larger Port Moresby invasion a few days later. The Zuikaku and Shokaku likewise were also not in the area. They were just entering the Coral Sea, expecting any enemy interception to come from farther out, not realizing that carriers had slipped past their submarine perimeter. In addition, poor weather had also kept their fighters on deck once reports reached Admiral Inoue about the Tulagi strike.
So the USS Yorktown ordered 2 more strikes on the vulnerable targets at Tulagi that day. And on one of them, Swede Vedesa was up yet again in his SBD. But this time with a new gunner in the back seat, a French-American by the name of Loveless Broussard. After dropping their payload on the mine layer Okinoshima, Swede yet again pulled off, expecting to escape the combat area. But this time, he ran into trouble.
I flew into a cloud and my backseat man started yelling in French. That's when I heard machine gun fire. Rounds thudded into my armored seat, pierced my canopy, and shot up my engine. I knew damn well what had happened. I'd taken a blast from somebody. I was sure it wasn't AA. I countered immediately because I knew it came from my right rear.
After swinging around in a split second, Swede, in his slow and lumbering Dauntless, discovers that a nimble Japanese seaplane had gotten into the air.
Here's a biplane, seaplane fighter, and F-1M, codenamed Pete. Fortunately, Bill Birch had given me many a lesson on counter moves, and I turned hard right into and under the Pete, then hard back to meet him head on if he scissored, which he did. We exchanged bursts of gunfire, and I could see his tracers coming towards me as he came to bear. His plane was maneuverable as hell. He was apparently a skilled pilot. We scissored 3 or 4 times.
Swede and the Pete fighter continued the dramatic dogfight, with each pilot trying to land a kill shot. In the clouded sky following a chaotic attack, there was no help coming. It was a one-on-one duel. With each passing turn, rounds flew from both aircraft across the sky in their head-to-head passes. Swede realized that sooner or later, one of the two must falter.
He's coming in. I dropped my nose. We're trying to get on each other's tail. I'm trying to outturn him. I didn't. I pulled up, ready to fire at him. I wished mightily at the time that I had more gunpowder in my SBD, but the 50 calibers firing through the prop were working well. I sighted on his engine, and I think I hit him. Behind me, Broussard is making that gun chatter. He had the first opportunity to hit him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he downed him. I turned back, and sure enough, he didn't counter. I turned, got on his tail, and he broke away, trailing heavy smoke. I needed to catch him and finish him off. As the Pete sped away, an SBD ahead of me jumped on his tail and sent the plane down in flames.
Swede would have to limp back home, realizing on the way that he himself had been hit critically as well. With oil leaking from his SBD, he landed on the Yorktown, and his engine gave out shortly after. He received no official credit for the kill, as it was unable to be confirmed.
By the late afternoon, the last raid was finished, and the final aircraft had been recovered by the Yorktown. Looking over the damage, the Japanese had taken substantial losses. No major warships were present in the harbor during the attack, but the Americans had pounded the targets that were there. The Japanese lost 1 destroyer, 3 minesweepers, and several smaller vessels, as well as all of their Mavis flying boats, a crippling loss for their recon operations. The Americans, in exchange, had lost just 3 Navy aircraft, but their real cost would come in revealing their presence. Now, before we get to the big cinematic battles that took place a few days later, you're probably wondering how we made these beautiful formation shots, such accurate naval fleets, or the gripping attack sequences. And the answer is this video's sponsor, War Thunder. In case you haven't tried it, War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made and is free to play on PC, console, and mobile device. Here, with over 95 million players worldwide, you can dive into epic PvP battles in over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, or ships from more than 10 nations, from the biplanes and armored cars of old to the jets and battle tanks of today. And once you join, you'll be immersed in their realistic graphics, as you can see in my videos, and authentic sound effects and battlefields that make you feel like you're literally in the action. And if you're wondering if it's right for your playstyle, War Thunder also has game modes for every player, from sim mode to realistic to arcade, so there's always something for everyone. And you don't need any special hardware to play. A mouse and keyboard works just fine. But best of all, if you sign up, you can come join me and the other War Thunder pilots that recreate these missions that you see in my videos. You can actually come be in these documentaries and fly in battles like Coral Sea. Just download War Thunder at the links in the pinned comment or description. It's free to play on PC, console, or mobile, and newer returning players who haven't played in 6 months will get a massive bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles and an exclusive vehicle decorator for a limited time only. So don't miss the next mission. Come and fly with us and recreate history only in War Thunder. Now, I believe the attack on Tulagi had just finished, and now the Japanese were getting wind of this battle.
Petty Officer Tetsuzo Iwamoto, on board of the Zuikaku, steaming towards the Coral Sea, also remembered hearing of this strike.
On May 4th, an American mobile force consisting of 2 large carriers and several battleships suddenly appeared at Tulagi on the front line of the Solomon Islands and launched a surprise attack on our forces. This can be said to be the largest scale enemy counterattack since the beginning of the war. It is reported that the flying boat base on Tulagi Island suffered particularly severe damage. Stimulated by a string of previous victories, we had been feeling a surge of pride. As a result, a tendency to underestimate the enemy had emerged, particularly widespread among the land units. Naturally, the enemy's next target of attack would be the Port Moresby invasion force. The mission accepted by our 5th Air Fleet was to intercept the enemy mobile force coming to attack our Port Moresby invasion force from the flank.
With May 5th dawning, both sides knew that a battle was coming, but bad weather kept recon aircraft from locating anything. Instead, the day would be used for preparation. The Yorktown steamed south and linked up with the Lexington and oiler USS Neosho so that they could refuel for the coming clash. On board of the oiler Neosho was Fireman 3rd Class Bill Liu. Many years later, he recalled how something was different about this refueling, as if it appeared that their commanders knew something was coming.
We got out there and we fueled the task force, the Lexington and the Yorktown. After we fueled them, they told us all we had to take freshwater showers, clean body and clean clothes on, in case of wounds, they wouldn't get infection as fast. We were a bunch of scared sailors. A lot of the men were transferred from other ships and they were going to go back to Pearl to go to new construction and back to States.
Another person who was given a glimpse of things to come during this refueling was none other than Swede Vedasa. On board of the USS Yorktown, after his big day striking Tulagi, Swede's time on the ship was set to end. He was supposed to cross over to the Neosho along with a handful of other men to be transferred back to the States. But according to his biography, just as he was about to cross over, his squadron leader, Bill Birch, said something that would change his life.
Swede, I know you guys are anxious to get off here, and they're waiting for you and all that. But it looks like we're gonna have some action the next couple of days, and we need all the pilots we can get and all the experience that we can save. And you guys are the most experienced in the squadron. How would you like to stay here? Swede quickly responded, gladly accepting the invitation to be a part of the expected action. And this would prove to be a fateful decision. He stood on the deck of the USS Yorktown and watched the Neosho finish her refueling. She then disconnected and pulled away from Task Force 17. In the next few days, more than half of her crew would be killed. During May 6th, the next day, both forces ramped up search flights, but still, poor weather hampered much of these efforts. The tropical squalls and cloud cover made it difficult for either side to find anything. It was now becoming abundantly clear that the most challenging part of this battle would be locating the enemy. On board of the Zuikaku, Iwamoto realized this fact. In his May 6th diary entry, he wrote on what he expected.
The aircraft on the deck had completed necessary preparations and could take off at any time on standby. However, the enemy mobile force did not appear that day. Victory or defeat of the overall battle would depend on luck. But among the factors determining the success or failure of the air battles, luck was not one of them. Victory or defeat there was determined by the skill or clumsiness of operations, the morale or skill of the pilots, and the quality and performance of equipment and material. It is either you die or I perish.
Iwamoto's assessment would be correct. His skill was certainly sufficient in the air, and he felt confident that he could take on any American pilot. But unfortunately for him, no amount of skill could find the enemy's fleet in poor weather. This was the challenge that both sides faced as they went into the 7th of May, and luck here was nowhere to be found.
At around 700 hours, both sides were frantically sending searches out all over the Coral Sea. Both knew that the enemy's carriers were there somewhere, and that whoever launched a raid first would have a high chance of victory. On the American side, SBD scouts were patrolling all around the Russell Islands, expecting the Japanese fleet to be supporting the upcoming invasion of Port Moresby, while the Kate scout planes and a handful of Japanese seaplanes searched the southern Coral Sea for Task Force 17. The first contact would be made by the Japanese, who received a report at around 7:22, calling out one carrier and one cruiser. Admiral Takeo Takagi, in charge of the Zuikaku and Shokaku at the time, knowing that a quick response could be the difference in victory or defeat, launched a maximum effort strike. At 800 hours, more than 75 aircraft took off in a well-coordinated raid. Leading the entire strike force was Kakuichi Takahashi, a seasoned VAL dive bomber pilot who had seen action at Pearl Harbor and in various other battles the previous months. Knowing that this was their first opportunity to hit an enemy carrier, the tension in every squadron was high. This would be a crucial flight. Iwamoto, flying slightly above and behind Takahashi in his Zero, recalls how this flight went.
On the 7th, a reconnaissance plane that took off from Shokaku sent an urgent telegram reporting enemy aircraft carrier sighted, and the aircraft on standby immediately departed toward the enemy. The opponents for the torpedo bomber and dive bomber groups are the enemy carriers. Sink one enemy large carrier. This is their greatest dream. Now is the time for our forces and a powerful opponent to engage in a true decisive battle. This time we have also prepared ourselves for major sacrifices. Perhaps I'll be one of them. Therefore, we must rouse our spirits to win this war.
But as the determined and focused Japanese pilots had just gotten into the air, a conflicting report arrived to Admiral Inoue and his staff. A second sighting from another Japanese scout plane. This one, however, reported multiple US carriers and supporting fleet in the other direction. By the time this report reached Admiral Takagi with the Zuikaku and Shokaku, he decided that it was too late to redirect the airborne strike force and that he was going to trust the first sighting. Thus, 78 aircraft headed south, deep into the Coral Sea and away from New Guinea. Meanwhile, by this time, the American scout planes have also made contact. An SBD from the USS Yorktown sent a report to Task Force 17, but it was garbled and unclear. It initially arrived as 2 carriers and 4 heavy cruisers sighted. Immediately, Admiral Fletcher likewise sent his force out for a maximum effort strike. 90 aircraft total from both the Lexington and Yorktown took off and headed to the reported location, bearing just northeast of Misima Island. Once again, up in the air for Scouting Squadron 5 was Swede Vedasa in his SBD Dauntless.
The weather in the Coral Sea was miserable, with fog, rain, and strong winds. However, this did not pose such a great problem, as we had been operating for months under similar conditions. We executed a running join-up, climbing all the way. We go up to 22,000 feet and headed north, where the weather was much improved. All I was thinking of, I guess others were too, is that damn gun sight fogging up again.
However, the Yorktown strike force would have to wait. They would not arrive first. Instead, just in front were the squadrons from the USS Lexington. But when these groups arrived, they found a different force than what was originally reported. Instead of multiple carriers, there was only one, and it was a light fleet carrier, the Shoho, which was less than half the size of the Shokaku class carriers that they were expecting. In reality, the Japanese fleet carriers were in the total opposite direction, searching the Coral Sea for Task Force 17. Instead, the American scout had discovered this light force by mistake. But present below was still a carrier, the best target they could hope for. Just past 1100 hours, the first to make their runs would be the SBDs of Scouting Squadron 2. They would drop in, taking the brunt of Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Due to the heavy defenses, they would land no hits, but drew the brunt of enemy fire away from the next wave. Next up would be the dive bombers from Bombing Squadron 2. They would score just 2 hits, igniting small fires, but not necessarily dealing a crippling blow. Finally, coming in last were the slower and more vulnerable TBDs, the torpedo bombers. Flying in the back seat of one was a gunner by the name of Walter Nelson.
It was kind of scary getting ready. You used to get a lump in the stomach. Once you got into combat, then you forgot all about it. There was no problem at all. We found him, and we made our torpedo run on the port side. He pickled a fish, but it wouldn't drop. So he went around and made a run again. When we coming in on the second pass, there was a shell must have exploded underneath us because it was just a whoom. I seen it as we banked away, and I could look down. And this time it worked. We watched the torpedo go in and blew that whole bow right off that damn thing.
The attack by the Lexington's torpedo bombers had been, for lack of a better term, devastating. For perhaps the only time in the first half of the war, American torpedo bombers were effective. The lumbering and slow devastators had escaped enemy fire, and their notoriously faulty torpedoes had worked to perfection. The result was a completely idle ship, taking on water and ripe for attack. Just in time for Swede Vedasa and the rest of the Yorktown's aircraft to begin their attack. A few moments later, at 11:25, they were underway.
I watched Birch, our lead pilot, drop at 2,500 feet. I saw the big bomb detach from the rack on the skipper's plane, taking what seemed to be a slight arcing trajectory, and plunge into the carrier deck almost amidships, followed by a tremendous blast with smoke and fire shooting out from the sides of the vessel. You talk about a concussion. All I could see was debris and everything just blowing in all directions. I thought to myself, how in the hell did that carrier stand that? I had dropped 2, and my gunner said, "Yes, you got a hit." As a matter of fact, out of 14 drops, we had 12 hits. If there was ever a perfect attack, this was it.
On the other side of the Coral Sea, Kakuichi Takahashi and his maximum effort raid had arrived in the target area, but there were no carriers to be found.
When we arrived at the predetermined location, we found no trace of the enemy. Meanwhile, the weather in the vicinity became increasingly bad, with clouds and fog continuously increasing, blurring our vision. But we also had to maintain high vigilance, because enemy fighters could appear at any moment. The main attack force continued searching for the enemy, using fan-shaped search methods. But this consumed more energy than combat. The enemy that should have appeared never did, instead leaving us extraordinarily fatigued. Finally, the attack force gave up the search and turned back. Our squadron, while performing the task of escorting the dive bombers, discovered 2 warships.
This would be the USS Neosho and USS Sims, which had just refueled the American task force and were now headed away from the battle. Unfortunately for the Imperial Navy, these were indeed the ships spotted by the Japanese recon plane, and the large deck of the oiler had been mistaken for an aircraft carrier with a cruiser escorting. With no other targets available, Commander Takahashi sent much of the attack force back to the carrier. He believed his dive bombers and a handful of fighters could handle these 2 ships. Tetsuzo Iwamoto, in his Zero, watched the attack begin.
The dive bomber squadron commander immediately ordered his men to prepare to bomb the enemy ships below us. We 2 circled in the air in a posture ready to attack at any moment while observing the enemy situation. We discovered that the enemy consisted of 1 large oiler and 1 destroyer. Both enemy ships were firing furiously upward toward our altitude. The dive bomber squadron had already begun its dive. Each plane followed the commander's aircraft toward the target, pulled up tightly along the sea surface after releasing bombs, and then withdrew at low altitude. The large oiler was hit amidships and caught fire. The destroyer was struck by a fatal shell. Its bow rose high, and it sank into the sea in an instant. Although the oiler continued to belch thick smoke and flames, it stubbornly kept firing back with machine guns. At that moment, one of our diving planes suddenly caught fire. In an instant, that plane crashed straight into the oiler, striking the deck. It seemed that the flames from the suicide plane ignited the oiler. The ship was instantly engulfed in raging fire, and the deck became a sea of flames.
On board of the USS Neosho, beneath the deck of the forward magazine, listening to the action, was Fireman 3rd Class Bill Liu.
I was down in a #1 magazine then. Pearl Harbor I was up above, but I don't know if I got demoted or what, but I was down in #1 magazine with 2 other guys. So I didn't see nothing, but I heard it over the JV phones they were talking. When you take a hit, if it was way back in the stern, which a lot of them were, or midship, you'd feel the ship would jar. Be scared. We were all scared. One of them was on flames and dove into our stack deck in the rear. Then somebody yelled, "Are you guys still alive down there?" And I said, "Yes, we are, but I'm sure scared." And he laughed and he said, "So are we."
With the massive explosion on the USS Sims, only 15 of her crew of more than 250 would survive. On board of the USS Neosho, the damage was critical, but she was still floating.
Then we heard abandoned ship, and I went over the side, and there was smoke coming up from the dive bomber that dove into us. And a friend of mine went first, and I went second, and I didn't have a life jacket because someone stole it under my bunk before I got there. Oh, out there swimming and having a time and no life jacket. I thought, well, what the hell, I'm going to go in this. I was going to drown myself. And I come up and this guy says, "Hold on, Bill, hold on, I'll help you." And he swam and I held on his life jacket. We saved 110 out of 296.
In quick succession, both U.S. Navy ships were left for scrap. It was a successful attack, but had the Imperial Navy actually vectored their flights to the main American fleet, the results could have been detrimental to the coming battles in the Pacific. Instead, through good fortune, they had not, and the Japanese bomber force could only return with their secondary targets sunk. Later in the afternoon, as the Japanese aircraft finally made it back to their fleet, exhausted from the long flight and tiring fruitless search for the American carriers, they received unexpected news.
Admiral Tulagi was ordering another strike, this time armed with a new report, with hopefully more accurate coordinates of Task Force 17. But again, search reports almost created more confusion than solutions. The Japanese search planes had actually sighted and reported an Allied support fleet, which had no carriers, and it was quite a distance away, just on the outer limits of the range of his planes. Tulagi, however, believed that he had a chance to hit the enemy, and he took it. But little did he know that in reality, the American carrier force was far closer than that. Located in the middle of the Coral Sea and nearly at the halfway point in their mission path, Task Force 17 waited. This special mission's path would take them almost directly over the American fleet, by accident. Just before 1700 hours, a group of 12 dive bombers and 15 torpedo bombers took off to strike what they believed would be the American fleet to the west in their second mission of the day. Being that it was already almost evening, by the time the force got to their target and returned to the carriers, it would be nighttime. And in 1942, this was an extremely risky endeavor. Nighttime carrier operations were hazardous and took months of specialized training. But the Japanese were without a doubt the best in the world at it at this time. To give his crews the best chance of success, he selected only his most experienced pilots and sent them off. Again, Kakuichi Takahashi would lead the raid from his vow. They would, however, have no fighter escort, as the strike would prioritize range. And after all, according to the plan, by the time they reached their target, they would have the cover of darkness to protect them.
Because he was left behind from this raid as a Zero pilot, Tetsuzo Iwamoto's account lacks a first-hand perspective on the event. But he still recalls vividly about what he had heard happened while he was on the carrier.
So at dusk, as the sun was setting, the planes took off, one after another, circled in the sky for a while, then headed off into the distance and gradually disappeared over the horizon. A few dozen minutes after our planes departed, everyone on board was waiting for reports of the attack on the enemy fleet. Soon the message came. We are now engaged in combat with enemy fighters.
As Kakuichi Takahashi flew west and led his group, suddenly they were pounced on by Wildcat fighters. From above and behind, the F-4Fs dove in, specifically on the vulnerable torpedo bombers that were lumbering along. They were still 100 miles from their expected contact, far from any anticipated threat of enemy interception. Because of this, the Japanese formation was far from combat ready. According to some reports, the canopies were fully closed, and rear guns were still tucked away due to the rain squalls that had continued to plague them every few minutes. This left the Kates as ripe targets for the Navy fighters. In just a few minutes, the F-4F Wildcats had shot down 9 aircraft, primarily torpedo bombers. Takahashi immediately knew that he had to abandon the mission, and ordered his pilots to jettison their payloads and for the surviving aircraft to turn back for the fleet. Unbeknown to the Japanese force, the reason they were so easily intercepted was because they had unintentionally passed directly over the American fleet en route to their reported target. But they never made visual contact due to the poor weather. And now, as the daylight faded and they turned to head back home, they were headed right for them yet again. One of the Wildcat pilots that had just been recovered by the USS Lexington was a young lieutenant by the name of Noel Gaylor.
On the night of May 7th, about midnight, it was determined that we were in the close vicinity of Japanese carriers. A portion of our fighters had previously attacked Japanese fighters and other carrier-based aircraft late that afternoon. The weather was extremely poor, rain squalls and poor visibility, and as dusk came on, we took aboard our combat patrol. About 10 minutes after I landed, 7 or 8 strange airplanes showed up and joined the Yorktown's landing circle. They came by and gave a recognition signal to the bridge, which happened to start off with the right letter, although the second letter was wrong. Then they turned on running lights and actually went down in the Yorktown's landing circle.
As these mysterious aircraft joined the approach for the Yorktown, one of the men that happened to be topside was none other than Swede Vedasa, watching his carrier also recover aircraft.
I'm up on the flight deck as Flatley's combat air patrol planes are coming in. Here's one coming up the starboard side. That guy's in trouble. He's supposed to be taking a wave off on the port side. I can see another one behind him. Someone's in trouble. I could have touched the damn wing. On the side is the biggest meatball you ever saw. Of course, I dropped my chalkboard right there, my mouth wide open. For Christ's sake, a Jap plane. Japanese planes are in the pattern. So I go around to the starboard side. I thought, nothing's gonna prevent those guys from strafing the deck. We've got planes on deck, gear, planes are gassed, all kinds of stuff that can burn.
What Swede was watching was a crucial mistake by an exhausted and confused Japanese strike force. As Takahashi, the lead pilot, had led his men back from their failed Dusk mission, they had arrived at what they believed to be their own fleet. He was aware that they were closer than expected, but presumed this to be a result of the carriers steaming west to close their return flight. But he was wrong. Instead, Takahashi had just led the surviving 18 aircraft directly over the enemy fleet, and they were now attempting to land on the very carriers they sought to sink. In a tragic turn of events, they had finally located the enemy's fleet when they had no bombs or torpedoes left to drop.
Miraculously, no Japanese aircraft were down during this mix-up, and Takahashi was able to guide the rest of his planes back to the fleet. But it did make one thing abundantly clear to everyone, that the two fleets were now right on top of one another, less than 120 miles apart. And as darkness set in, everyone knew that tomorrow the action would come, and that this time mistakes could not be afforded. And this crucial day, May 8th of 1942, will be in part 2 of my video on Coral Sea. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Don't forget to download War Thunder free on mobile device, console, or PC at the link in the description or pinned comment. And new or returning players who haven't played in 6 months will get a massive bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles and an exclusive vehicle decorator. Available only for a limited time, so don't miss it. Also, make sure to check out my new movie, 10 Good Men, coming to select theaters in summer of 2026. Go to the website here to find a screening near you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.